Started in just a minute. Thanks so much to everybody for coming out tonight. I'm Ashley Runyon. I'm the director of the University Press of Kentucky, and it has been a long time since we've been able to actually and properly celebrate one of our authors. Excited to make some introductions tonight for our new release, Drowned Town. This is a great partnership for us at the Press with the Heinemann Settlement School, and it's part of our Fireside Industries imprint. And that imprint is really, it's focused on place. So it has a lot of top-tier authors. We're so excited to have Jayne as one of those. And place is such an important part of all of the books that we have in that imprint. And I think it's just very relevant for Drowned Town, what we're going to talk about tonight. The idea of loss of place, how it can really impact generations, and then how finding your place can really, be your salvation. I think it's just such a timely and important theme for us tonight. So without further ado, let's introduce our guests. First up is Silas House. He is the New York Times bestselling author of 6 novels, 1 book of creative nonfiction, and 3 plays. His writing frequently appears in top national publications like The Atlantic, and he's been published recently in Time, The New York Times, Garden & Gun, and The Advocate. His many honors include the Nautilus Award, the Appalachian Book of the Year, and the Storylines Prize. House was one of the main subjects and an executive producer of the revolutionary documentary Hillbilly, which won the Foreign Press Association's Documentary Award, top honors from the LA Film Festival, and was also purchased by Hulu. Silas serves as the NEH chair at Berea College and is on the fiction faculty at the Spalding School of Writing's MFA program. And we are so excited at the University Press of Kentucky to have him joining us as the imprint editor for Fireside Industries. And then our woman of the hour, Jayne Moore Waldrop, is a Kentucky writer and attorney. She is the author of Pandemic Lent, A Season in Poems, as well as Tracing My Steps, which was a finalist in the new Women's Voices chapbook series. She's a former book columnist for the Louisville Courier-Journal, a literary arts liaison at the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, and she was appointed by the governor to serve 2 terms on the Kentucky Arts Council. Jayne's work has appeared in numerous publications, including the Anthology of Appalachian Writers, Still, the Journal, New Madrid Journal, Appalachian Heritage, Deep South Magazine, and Kentucky Monthly. Her stories were selected as Judge's Choice in the 2016 Still Journal Fiction Contest, a finalist for the 2015 Reynolds Price Fiction Prize, the 2016 Tilly Olson Fiction Award, and the 2017 Still Journal Fiction Contest. Jayne has also been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of Net Anthology. And we're here tonight to celebrate her newest work, Drowned Town.
Thank you all very much. Can you hear me back there? Good, thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight to join us. I'm so happy to be part of bringing this book into the world. First of all, I should tell you that Jayne and I will talk and she'll read a little bit. We'll go about 30 minutes and then we're going to turn it over to you if you have questions for just a few minutes. So be thinking up something really clever. But I want to begin by acknowledging that the first series editor for Fireside, our imprint, was Rebecca Gale Howell, and I was really glad to be able to follow in her footsteps in this position. And so even though Fireside had been around about a year or a little more, this Jayne's book was the first book of mine that I was able to choose for this imprint. And so as soon as I knew that I was going to have that opportunity, Jayne's book was the first book that I knew really needed to be out there in the world. It's just a book that works on every level for me. I love the way that it gives dignity to rural lives. I love the way that it loves the place but also critiques the place in a really complex way. I love the characters And you know, when I think of my favorite books, what I always think of are the characters. And these are characters that just, they feel like real people to me. And that to me is the test of a really great book. And I'm deeply moved by her characters too. They really stick with me and I care about them. I love the way that Jayne gives life to middle-aged characters and gives them sex lives and makes them, you know, and shows people at their prime, you know. When they're figuring things out again, right? And they almost have it figured out. And so there's just so much good. And the other thing is they're really good people, but they're not saints. That complexity is there. That's so important. But I guess the other thing besides the characters is just the language of this book. It's lyrical without being showy, and it's thematically profound without being didactic. So to me, it just checks all the boxes. It does everything that a good piece of fiction should do, and I'm just really proud to have worked with it, and to work with Jayne, who many of you know Jayne, and you know what a pleasure that was. To just be in conversation with her is always a pleasure, and especially to be in conversation with her about literature. And she cares so deeply about it, and so I appreciate that. So with that all in mind, I'll turn it over to you, Jayne, and let you talk a little bit. First of all, why don't you tell us what a drowned town is, and then tell everybody what you want them to know about this book.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for everything you've said. I'm not sure I need to say anything else now. But it's been a real pleasure to work with you as my editor. I couldn't ask for a better fiction editor for this book. You know, it's been an exceptional opportunity. I also want to thank, you know, it's kind of my dream team to work with University Press of Kentucky and the Heinemann Settlement School. I have such respect for both institutions and their literary traditions. I'm just honored to be part of it now and to be connected to it. So I want to thank everybody for this opportunity. I guess to get to the story, a drowned town is a term that's commonly used. It's not just for Western Kentucky, but it's where a river anywhere in the world is dammed and a lake or a reservoir is formed. You know, areas are affected, towns are lost, they become submerged. So it's those drowned towns and half-drowned towns that I became really fascinated with in Western Kentucky. I'm from Paducah, so I grew up, you know, spending time on Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley and in Land Between the Lakes. So this area is very important to me. But I never really acknowledged or even thought about the sacrifice that some people made in order to for these projects to be built for the common good. There's no question that the Kentucky Dam, Barkley Dam, and Land Between the Lakes were important public projects. The dams provided hydroelectric power and flood control and tourism. So there's no question that they were important public projects and in the public interest. But as an adult, I started considering, you know, what was here. I've only known it as these places of recreation and fun and everything that I loved about being outdoors and being in nature. But when I started researching it, I realized the families who were affected, the communities that were affected, gave an enormous gift in the public interest. So I wanted to honor that and at least acknowledge that. A lot of time has passed since Kentucky Lake was built. it was built in the 1940s as part of the New Deal and the rural electrification projects. Barkley was in the mid-60s, and Land Between the Lakes was officially condemned and taken by eminent domain, and everyone moved out by 1970. So these giant projects in Western Kentucky changed the environment and the geography forever. And it also changed the history and the culture quite a bit too. So I wanted to acknowledge that.
Well, why don't you read just a little bit? Give us
Okay.
a little preview of it.
I'm going to start at the beginning because I think you need to know a little bit about the characters. And this first chapter introduces Cam Weatherford, who is a major character. And she grew up in Eddyville. She was a child in Eddyville, and her family was moved out. But she feels this connection to this place, this drowned town. Dry ground. Cam wandered through this uninhabited place, remembering each house and family and tree that had been here before the water came. She stumbled, nearly turning an ankle as she crossed a disintegrating asphalt slab, a remnant of the street where she had lived in a town that once existed. She glanced in both directions, more from childhood habit than necessity. Since there were no cars left, there was nothing left, only a few shards of brick and stone, a faint curvature of sky and earth that felt vaguely familiar. Her mother's unsealed wedding dress had made her feel nostalgic and drawn back to the old town. The ecru lace gown, preserved with care for future generations in a heavy cardboard box designed to keep out moisture and fabric-eating pests, had been brought out and altered to fit Cam. The wedding, her second, Owen's first, was in 3 days. She and Owen had been friends since childhood when they both lived in this old town. Cam had been slow to see him as anything but a buddy and hesitant about marrying again, but this time made sense, she thought. Now in their 40s, surely they knew what they were getting into. That morning she had met with the seamstress for a final fitting. The waistline had been let out a bit, the shoulders taken in, torn lace repaired in a few spots. In the small, cluttered tailor shop, she slipped the dress on and looked at herself in a three-way mirror. "How does it feel?" the seamstress asked as she zipped up the back and tugged at the neckline. "Like I've stepped back in time," Camp said, thinking about the framed wedding picture that had been on her parents' bedside table for as long as she could remember. Her mother wore the same dress in the photograph, her satin slingback pumps shining beneath the tea-length hem. The black and white photo had been snapped in 1955 as the smiling young bride and groom descended the steep concrete steps at the Eddyville First Methodist Church. And now, nearly 50 years later, Cam looked in the mirror and thought the dress made her look younger too. She was smiling as she left the shop, pleased with how the gown had turned out, but drawn to the place in the photograph. For the last few months, she had focused on the future, whether to get married, what kind of wedding suited them, but today the past pulled at her. She ignored the list of errands in her pocket and decided to drive to the old town. She still remembered the way. The two-lane highway dead-ended at a lonesome knoll overlooking Lake Barkley. Cam parked in a grassy area beside the road and walked toward what used to be Water Street, the hilly one that had ended at the ferry landing. The broad lake sparkled in the midday sun. The sky was bright and cloudless. She watched as a large cabin cruiser, better suited for the ocean than an inland waterway, powered its way through the narrow, twisting channel marked by red and green navigation buoys. The markers served as both reminder and warning that the Cumberland River's deep channel still provided the safest passage on a lake that appeared vast but could be deceptively shallow in places. The cruiser spread an oversized wake that rocked nearby fishing boats and caused the captain of a slow, scruffy pontoon boat to swerve at a defensive angle to keep from getting swamped. A lone bronze marker revealed the spot's history as the former site of Eddyville, a thriving town settled near a series of bends in the Cumberland River, which snakes a course through the middle of the country, from mountains to barrens to rolling hills. The plaque told the town's role in American history as an outpost on the western frontier, as an important junction during the Civil War, as a commercial center and county seat. The tarnished words also described mid-century government projects for flood control, hydroelectric power, and tourism when the flowing river was dammed. The sign memorialized U.S. presidents, vice presidents, and governors from Kentucky and Tennessee, but failed to mention the people who had lived in the town and had given up their homes as the giant lake rose. They had been told their sacrifice was for the public good. They were never told how much they would miss it or for how long. Cam wondered if the adults had realized what they were losing when everyone was moved out. At the time, she had been a child, not privy to their conversations about the relocation. Maybe some folks jumped at the chance to leave this place and its floodwaters, where the river crawled out of its bed and slipped into town at least once a year, usually in late winter or spring. They had tired of shoveling mud-caked streets and sidewalks, pumping out perennially musty wet basements, and moving furniture to the attic. The chance to live on higher ground lured them away, enticed by the gift of free land for those who committed to build in a town that sprouted in a cornfield 2 miles away. Others had fought the taking of their land, but without success. In the end, everyone was forced out.
So the Cumberland River is almost a metaphor in the book, right? Because it wanders in and out.
It does.
The same way it wanders in and out of Kentucky. And a lot of us who were raised in Kentucky, since it's a big long state, have sort of a relationship with Tennessee. The Cumberland River goes down into there. The book
Right.
goes down into Nashville at one point. So I love the way you use the Cumberland River throughout the book.
It does. Well, it naturally meanders, as you said, from far eastern Kentucky, which is where my family's from, and ends up in western Kentucky. And so I have some stories that meander also through the state, although primarily it's set in the stories about the setting in western Kentucky. I have characters in Louisville, Nashville, and in Appalachia. So, and in Lexington too. There's some mentions of Lexington in the book too. So we sort of take a long, curving, meandering trip through Kentucky.
Right. It's such a Kentucky book, but it also transcends that, because it's so much about the way working people are so often negated and erased and just shoved aside, and there's also a great conflict between the rural and the urban, and Louisville and the rest of the state, and there's a lot going on in a really good way.
Well, and the two main women characters sort of represent that rural-urban divide, and which I think is so common in Kentucky, that Louisville doesn't know Eastern Kentucky or Western Kentucky, and vice versa. Very provincial in certain areas. So Cam is the one from Western Kentucky. Her best friend Margaret is a very affluent person who grew up in Louisville. They meet in college, and they are, through that relationship, they both, I think, find their true selves. I think that's true of almost any relationship. You grow and you change in relationships, and I think theirs is very important, that sort of chosen sisters kind of effect on each of them.
Yeah, one of the smartest things about the book is that one of the main characters is a real anti-hero, almost like a Don Draper sort of character, in that you're intrigued by her, but sometimes you just want to shake her, right? And so
she can be really nasty.
She can be really, and she must be a lot of fun to write for that reason.
Well, she's a lawyer in Louisville, and so I practiced law in Louisville for a long time. So I just, as they say, write what you know.
Right.
So,
But what makes it so interesting is, she is so brusque and sometimes just hateful, but she loves her best friend Cam, who is none of those things. Cam is so positive and so generous, and so I just love the way you show those relationships and the way that we have anchors, that we have people who anchor us and who center us, and Cam is that for Margaret. It's just such a fascinating relationship. It's one of the most beautiful things about the book, I think.
Thank you.
Because, we see Margaret do these kind of hateful things, but we never hate her because we know her vulnerabilities, and we know how much she loves Cam, and she loves Cam's family, and she loves the lake. She loves that area. It
Right.
centers her, even though she's from Louisville. It's just really interesting and complex.
she got to know the area through Cam and Cam's family and spent a lot of time with them, and they welcomed her into their family. Yeah, they.
Right. It's just that's why they feel so real to me. I mean, they have such a history, and you weave that in, right? That's the key. Is it's not like this big clump of backstory. It's woven in throughout the whole book, and so I guess we should tell everybody that it is a book of linked stories, but it is also, I think it can also be read like a novel. I think, if Patrick and Ashley can correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't really we haven't put a real mark on that, have we? We just sort of think of it as a work of fiction. So people can think of it in either way. You can sort of read the stories in order, and that is its own reward, or you can read them out of order if you want to, and I think it works just as well that way.
Right.
But why did you choose to tell it that way, as
Because
linked?
I wanted to tell different perspectives from all around the lake, and also it sort of weaves in and out of time also. There are some stories that happen early in the history, and then it comes up to about 2005 is
Yeah.
when the present action is. So, but I wanted that background to tell the history of the loss and the movement, the relocations that were required. So I just wanted to tell it from lots of different perspectives, not just one single viewpoint. So that's why the idea of either linked stories or a novel in stories is sometimes how it's referred to. I wanted to give that broader picture. One of my favorite books is Olive Kittredge, and it is a book that is technically linked
Another
stories.
anti-hero.
Yes, very much an anti-hero. So I love that format, and I've discovered that book based on one of my professor's references, recommendations for me when I was working on my MFA. So it's a really wonderful book that I think taught me a lot about how you can weave lots of different stories in, and you get this full look at this place. Even though Olive Kittredge is about a person, but it's also about that place and everyone who lives there and what the community that they have.
Yeah, and somehow it all circles around Olive.
Right.
And in a way, the book also sort of is centered by the wedding, too.
Yes.
A lot of it comes back to the wedding, and sometimes in real subtle ways and sometimes in real blatant ways. So there's so many when I teach writing, I always teach about overlapping circles, and opposites and doubles. Those are three things that are really important in writing, and the book does that very well. Let's see. One thing I wanted to talk about that I sort of mentioned is the idea of, in a lot of media these days, we see 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, and not to slight 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, but I can only take so much, of friends or whatever. And so, like I said, one thing I love about the book, it is about people in their 40s and 50s, and like I said, they're complete human beings. It reminds me of that John Prine song. I can't remember the name of it right now. Hello in there. You know, the idea of you get a certain age and everybody just thinks all you do is just, you know, you don't do anything and nobody ever comes to see you or whatever. And these people are living, you know. It also reminds me, in that passage you read reminded me of the first time I went on a book tour, people would say to me, it really pissed me off, they would say, things must be so simple and slow where you're from. I'm like, no, they're really complicated. And we're really busy, you know? And your characters are too, right? And so, I mean, were you thinking about that, or is that just organic and that just came through when you were writing?
I think it just happened.
Yeah.
But I wanted to also show this long-term friendship between these two women who have known each other, you know, since college, and they're still together. They've led very different lives. They're not together all the time. You know, Cam lives in Nashville. Margaret lives in Louisville. So, you know, there's a lot of change through a long-term friendship, and a lot of happiness and a lot of tragedy too, or can be just sad life events.
Yeah, I think it really captures well, you know, that some of my strongest friendships are with people that I don't get to see very often, right? But you pick right back up where you left off. You might go 2 years and you just, it just all falls right back in place.
Especially during the pandemic.
Right, yes. There's also a racial component. That's something else that the book does is, I think it really shows Kentucky as a place where lots of different kinds of people live.
Right.
And black people in rural Kentucky are often erased, you know, and people just have this idea that there's a gay character, you know, who lives in rural Kentucky, and these are the kinds of characters that people in New York City just think we all leave, you know.
Right.
All right.
Especially in a rural setting.
Right.
And, you know, just not just in Kentucky, but a rural setting. And like you said, yeah, we're all living life, and everybody's, you know, it's
especially
a complete community.
Right.
Know?
It's especially important in a book that's about erasure, right? To
Yes.
show that these people exist, and especially there was, especially in Land Between the Lakes, I believe, there was a large black community, right? That
There
was moved out.
There was.
Yeah.
That community had been there since, you know, they were brought there as enslaved people to work the iron industry and the iron furnaces there. And after slavery ended, many stayed and bought property there and farmed. And, you know, Land Between the Lakes, if you go there now, it looks like it's never been inhabited. All signs of human development and houses and communities and businesses were all wiped out when it became a national recreation area. So it is beautiful, it looks pristine, but there is a history there, and there is a deep history there that, you know, I think as time passes, we may forget, but there used to be towns there, and there used to be a lot of small farmers, and, you know, it was a thriving rural community. So I wanted to show that, and that means that there are going to be lots of different types of people occupying those places and who call those places home.
Yeah. There's so much more I want to talk about, but I want to give the audience time to talk, so let's have sort of a lightning round for our last few questions. We have about 5 more minutes left to talk, and then we'll turn it over to them, and we want to hear you read a little bit more. Okay. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, there was this wonderful image in the book of these white pelicans that I just can't get out of my mind. So I wonder if you would just tell folks about that and how the white pelicans are a metaphor as well for the theme of the book.
White pelicans actually live in western Kentucky, which first ones I saw down there it's about 15 years ago, and it's shocking when I first saw them. They didn't live there as I grew up in western Kentucky. So they have, perhaps with climate change, but also the change in that environment, that it became a very hospitable environment for them with these two giant lakes that have now existed for a half century. So they are, they're there every year. They do migrate. Some stay year-round though, or stay through the winter. But it's just a remarkable sight because it's so unexpected. You don't expect to see a white pelican in Kentucky. So they became a metaphor for me for all the change, and that people come and birds come, people come, and they acclimate to change. Nothing stays the same, but it's a beautiful part of the landscape now. These migratory patterns have changed so much since the lakes were built. And it adds another layer of beauty, I think, when you go there and the nature is evolving constantly. And I just thought it was a good symbol for the way I see Western Kentucky changing in the last half century.
Yeah, yeah, it stays in your mind for sure. Do you have a favorite story, or is that sort of like asking to pick a favorite child?
Well, my sons are both here tonight, so I can't answer that question. But, well, there are a couple of stories that I particularly like. One is about an inmate who lives in the Kentucky State Penitentiary and who watches as the lake rises after the dam is built and the town of Eddyville is deconstructed. I also like a story that I wrote about a land appraiser who was appraising property and land between the lakes when the buyouts were occurring. He comes to realize that it is more than just the objective numbers that he can put to a parcel of ground in land between the lakes, or between the rivers as it was known then. So, he evolves in his thinking too, and wonders who thought up this idea to move all these people out and to create this. But he's making a living. He's an appraiser.
Yeah. My favorite is called Mint Springs, and it just, I just think my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and it just captures that so well in a way that I've never seen it captured in literature. And it works so well thematically because so much of the book is about loss and change and the passage of time, and so for her, all of that is all tangled up together in those last moments. So it works just beautifully as to me, it just epitomizes the book and everything that's great about it. And I know that one's really close to your heart.
It is. It is. My mother also had dementia, and so a lot of change is, we make decisions to change, to relocate, but a lot of change comes from things that are out of our control, whether that is the government taking your land or, a horrible disease like dementia. Or Margaret's husband is also has a health issue that it meant a lot of loss to her, and of course to him too. But I think it's how humans deal with loss and change, and if you're ever able to see what comes from that loss, what goes beyond loss. As humans, we face it.
Yeah. Well, we did get the Western Kentucky Writer Seal of Approval from Bobby Ann Mason. So
that meant a lot.
Yes. And so I just think Jayne is now part of that, Parthenon of of Kentucky Writers and Western Kentucky Writers now, Robert Penn Warren and Bobby Ann Mason. And Christopher was telling me about one that he really admired earlier. Who was that, Christopher? Bissett.
Bisson.
Yes, yes. So look for those. Bisson, Warren, Mason, Moore Waldrop. So
Wow. I'm done.
Oh, you read us one more little section, and then
Okay.
we'll turn it over to them.
Sure. Well, I mentioned Lester, the prisoner. I'm going to read a little bit from this story. View from within. Every morning before breakfast lineup, men on heavy equipment return to their work of demolishing the old town within view of Lester Elliott's cell. With the new lake rising, lapping above the ancient riverbanks, they labored with new fury, even working weekends to finish the job. The sounds of front-end loaders and excavators came through the open windows in the prison's thick stone walls, windows shaped like narrow slots designed for ventilation, not escape. The noise bothered some of the inmates who complained they couldn't sleep for all the ruckus, but not Lester. He had always been an early riser, and he liked watching life outside. From his cell on the third floor of the penitentiary, which itself rose high on a bluff above the town and river, Lester looked through his tiny slot window, the view unobstructed by mountains or trees. Across the river stood a big brick house, the only house opposite among the vast bottomland that stretched for miles. As a crow might fly across the broad and open sky, the house was directly across the Cumberland from his cell. Years ago, when Lester first arrived, a guard had told him that the distant setting was called Mint Springs, a small community situated on a narrow strip of land known as Between the Rivers, bordered by the Tennessee on the west and the Cumberland on the east. And year after year, sorry about that, as he served his sentence, he watched the house as seasons unfolded, as members of the farm family or field hands worked the land. To Lester, the place seemed like a dream, a mirage that he was unlikely to reach. The guards soon realized Lester was not a troublemaker. They treated him better than a lot of the prisoners, even gave him his choice of jobs. Every inmate had to work, but some jobs were less desirable than others. He chose the leather workshop, where he learned to make wallets and purses and belts, tooled with flowers and curlicues, which he then stained with a variety of dyes. He signed each piece by tapping his initials into a hidden spot that wouldn't mar the design. At the little shop on Water Street, where inmate crafts were sold to the public, customers searched for leather pieces with an LE inscription. Word got around that a fellow by the name of Lester turned out quality work. In the workshop, he worked at a table next to Billy Morgan, a young thief from Lexington. 3 large windows allowed light to flood in, with metal bars that didn't completely obstruct the view of the river and the town. The smell of cowhide and leather dye filled the hot, humid air. "I heard they're going to flood this place and let us all drown," Billy said. A scowl pinched the space between his eyebrows. "They can't do that," Lester said. He kept hammering. He was working on a belt with a fancy design of cactus against a desert sunset. "I don't know," Billy said. "Seems like they can do anything they want by the looks of that town." "That's the damn truth," Lester said. He stopped working and walked over to the windows. Eddyville was nearly leveled. For the last 3 years, he had watched as the town was deconstructed. The houses and businesses were gone. The people had moved away. He had heard the dam about 10 miles downstream was finished. The water was rising. The river was becoming a lake according to plan.
Thank you. Couple questions? Christopher?
I'm so looking forward to reading this book,
Thank you.
but I haven't read it yet. So I can only say that to this point, my favorite book of the 21st century is a book of linked short stories called
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I love that book so much that I sought out its constituent parts. I tracked down the magazines where the pieces had originally appeared, and I was amazed to discover that she had made substantial changes. And I wondered if you made any changes to the constituent parts of this book from the stories that were originally published.
Good question.
That is a good question. Some of the stories have evolved, other than just editing processes. But one that was published, the first one that was ever published, is Across the Creek. And it was published, I think, in 2014 or 2015.
It's a good story for Halloween. It's a creepy little story.
Yeah, it's got a creepy edge to it. That one did change probably a little more because it wasn't originally connected to the lake. So I changed its setting a little bit to bring it into the lake. It was still in western Kentucky, but there's a stronger image of the lake. It's always had a connection to the prison. It's another prison story. So.
I haven't obviously read the book either. I love the sections that you read.
Thank you.
And, I'm from Lexington, and in 1984, I was newlywed, and my husband at the time and another couple and I went camping with boats on Laurel Lake. And when we woke up the next morning, and a man appeared, he'd driven kind of way, way out to where we were, and he was really sad. And we spoke to him, and he said, "Oh, that's where my house was. That's where I grew up, but it's under the water." And it was really, it was 1984. It left a huge impression on me for the impact of all of that being wiped out. And similarly, I had a really good friend who was black, who lived in Danville, middle-class neighborhood that was condemned by urban renewal. And they owned it. They never had as nice a house. Displaced in their neighborhood and their friends and their community. So I think it's really cool that you are looking at, kind of what happens when all that's erased. It's a sort of historical trauma.
I'm so glad you brought that up because there are so many areas throughout Kentucky, like Laurel Lake, Lake Cumberland, Rough River. They're just either TVA or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers lakes all over Kentucky and all over the southeast particularly. The Cumberland River is dammed multiple times to create lakes all along its meandering path. So I think there are many areas that know the loss of their community. And again, for the public good, in the public interest, as far as the general flood control and electrification and all that. But that reminds me of, we were out in Nevada a couple of years ago and went to Lake Mead, and there is a town out there that has reappeared as Lake Mead's water keeps dropping. There's a drowned town out there that has reappeared. It's St. Thomas. So, they're all over the country, and I think as we see lake levels drop, perhaps with increased temperatures, droughts, we're going to see this. It's not like there's this magical land under there or this city that's going to come back intact, but the remnants are there.
Yes.
I told you earlier how much, I did read the book, and how much I appreciated the fact that reading a work of fiction, I actually learned something that made an impact on me. I had no idea about these drowned towns. And I also was getting, in my mind, I was getting militant and upset, on behalf of the people, and I was wondering how you managed to you saw both sides and you were very even-handed. And I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have started crusading along the way, but I appreciated how you did that.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that it reads like that because I think, I want to show both sides. because there are a lot of people who firmly believe that the projects were the right thing to do. But I also want to acknowledge this history. I'm glad you brought up fiction also for that reason. There are books, nonfiction books and books of history about what happened in Western Kentucky. That has been documented, and of course I relied on those sources as I did my research. But I wanted the freedom that comes with writing fiction to go more, to the human stories and to create these characters who might have experienced the facts. So to me, going with fiction was the way to go, so that I had the freedom to tell the story that I wanted to tell, and to let lots of different characters tell that story.
One other question, kind of a little one. Why did they have to demolish the towns if they were just going to be under?
Well, that's an interesting point. They were, I guess, for navigational purposes, they had to get rid of, the obstructions.
The higher,
Yeah.
So now it would be basically just roads and stuff left.
Yeah, and it's usually only at Winter Pool, when the water is at its lowest all year, that you see these remnants. You don't see them normally, when you're out water skiing or whatever, you don't really see them. But in the winter, when they take the water levels down to Winter Pool to prevent wintertime flooding, which is usually when rivers flood, is in late winter or spring. So you don't really see these remnants. You don't see house foundations until the water drops significantly.
That would be eerie.
It is eerie. That's the image that really haunted me. Once I saw that, I was in Old Catawba, Kentucky, and walking along the shoreline, and at Winter Pool, you can still see big slabs of asphalt. You can see brick sidewalks. You can see even like railroad spikes where the railroad station used to sit. So that to me was a really haunting image, and became the basis for these stories. Because it just, when I was the one out water skiing in the summer, I never thought about who lived here before, or that there was something here other than this beautiful lake. So I just wanted to research that and figure out, how these towns were situated and who lived there and what this history was.
Well, thanks to your book, I will never look at these, sort of the land between the lakes, or again, in the same way. It's
Thank
really
you. Thank
very
you.
good.
Jayne will be signing books, and if you get your book signed, she'll be glad to take your questions. So if you have one and we didn't get to call on you, that's your chance to ask another question. She will be hanging out to visit with everybody. But can we have one more to close this down?
Yeah, I think
I've got a comment, a question. I remember as a child camping out at Pillman's Ferry campground and walking down a long path with my brother, and we'd come to the end of the path, and there was a cliff that seemed as tall as this room, and you would jump off the cliff.
yeah,
into
the rock
lake.
quarry.
The rock quarry, which obviously made no sense to me as an 11-year-old, but now it was flooded, rim around rock quarry.
Yes.
And deep water. So the question, did you give any shout out to monkey's eyebrow or possum trot?
That's in the sequel.
Can't wait to look it up.
Well, thank you all again for being with us tonight. I want to thank so much Ashley and Patrick for all the great work they do at the University Press of Kentucky. It's such an essential part of keeping the literature alive in Kentucky. So please be good literary citizens and buy your books directly from the press or from an independent bookstore. We have a couple of really great ones here in town. And thanks to Hyman Settlement School for all the work they've done to make Fireside work. So thank you all again. Thanks, Jayne.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to go in back?
Okay.
Get my mask back on.